How much longer are you going to put up with this? How much longer? How many more years are you going to allow this version of yourself to reign over your experience? This version that is fearful. Whenever that comes to your mind, you get fearful. Whenever that situation happens, you're triggered in this way. How much longer? How much longer are you going to let the insecurity, the jealousy, the possessiveness, lack of confidence, how much longer? Now that situation that happened to you actually happened. Whatever that was that resulted in this being your experience was real. And we have to acknowledge that. But how much longer? How much longer is that experience going to supersede every other experience? You can't be happy in your relationship because that experience continues to come up, that thing that happened. You can't be successful in your relationship because that experience, that thing that made you insecure, now when you're triggered, you're then back in that experience again. How much longer? That situation that happened when you were 10 and now you're 40. So you got 10 through 20 where you're in the same cycle, where this spirit, this spirit of fear, this spirit of insecurity, this spirit of jealousy, this spirit of anger, whatever it is that rules over you, all 10 of those years, every time something happens to trigger that, you allow it to take over. You allow it to be your experience. So then 20 to 30 is still ruling over you. My question is, how much longer? 30 to 40. Is it going to be 50 to 60? 60 to 70? Will you ever overcome the experience that happened to you? Will you ever get past what hurt you? One of the main reasons why that continues to rule over you and why it will continue to rule over you is because every time the situation happens that triggers you, you then fight the reality of the experience that is the past experience that is bleeding into your now experience. So let's take, for example, I'm going to use a car situation, even though this video is about relationships. It's about you getting past the hang-ups so you can have a good relationship. So say you're in the car, and when you used to be in the car when you were younger with your parent, whenever someone would cut them off, they would start screaming. They would roll down their window. They would flick off the person. That was your past experience. And so then you start driving at, whatever age, 16, we get permits, I believe, and someone cuts you off, and immediately when you're triggered, you go into that spirit of anger that you experienced, that was part of your past experience. So here, now it's 10 years later, 26, you've been driving for 10 years. And when someone cuts you off, that is your response. Because when you're triggered, you always submit to that old spirit. And that is my question to you. How long? How long are you going to let these lesser spirits reign over you? When are you going to decide, I'm not going to give in to that anger? And so, the way to begin to do this is to acknowledge the root of the experience, to acknowledge the beginning, the beginning point of the experience that continues again to bleed into your now. And so, when that car cuts you off, and here, it's 40 years now since you've been driving, or it's 30 years since you've been driving, but your response is the same. That's not growth. And you're better than that. You're better than that. And you don't have to live another 5, 10, 15 years being affected by these same trigger points. That every time the enemy wants to get to you, he knows what button to push, knows how to get you out of your true self, knows how to stop you from moving forward. The time of this stagnation is over. And so what you have to do is, when the trigger happens, instead of becoming the trigger, you have to acknowledge the trigger. So when you're in the car here 30 years later and someone cuts you off and then blows at you as if you did something, you have to see the reaction that is your pattern. And you have to openly acknowledge the reaction. And so that looks like you saying, I see you. I see the anger that you agreed with back when you were younger, because of that was the anger that your parent agreed with. I see you, and I see the anger, and I acknowledge you. I acknowledge you. And that's it. Because whatever the spirit is that becomes dominant when the trigger happens, whether it's jealousy, whether it's insecurity, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, whether it's unsurety, whether it's depression, whatever that is, it's dominant because it wants to be acknowledged. It's dominant because it wants to be seen. And so then you feed it the energy. You give it the energy, and you become the jealousy. And then the jealousy gets its full fix for that moment. And then it waits for the next opportunity to be triggered. But no, when that situation happens, that makes you feel that pain, that makes you feel like cussing that person out, that makes you feel like, you're not loved, that makes you feel like you're going to be hurt. This person said this, and now, you're going to be a certain way. You're not going to talk to them. You have to acknowledge wherever this is coming from, the root of the past situation where this began. Okay. I feel jealous here because in high school, this boyfriend gave that girl attention, and that's where I'm still operating from 40 years later. So then in your now relationship, when the trigger happens and the spirit of jealousy desires to be seen, you don't have to allow it to play out in your experience. You don't have to give the spirit that power. You can just acknowledge, I see you. I remember the situation. And I remember what it felt like. And that it made you feel jealous. And I see you. You are seen. You are heard. And I know what that feels like. And then you move on. And as you begin to do this, as you allow, and it's painful. It's painful, to not walk out the experience. It's painful to not allow the spirit to play itself out, especially when it's a strong man, when it's a spirit that has been around for a long time, that has been in your life. And as you acknowledge it, as you observe it, it will be painful to not allow it to move through you, to not allow it to take precedence in your life, to not become that spirit of anger, to not become that spirit of envy, to not become that jealousy, that insecurity. But if you can endure the suffering of acknowledging it and not allowing it to become you, but saying, I see you, and I remember when it happened, and I remember how painful it was for you. And I'm sorry that happened to you. And I acknowledge it. I acknowledge your pain. That stronghold will begin to lose its power. I'll see you next time.